Hi, we are live for our What's Woke Got to Do with It? Statism and Compliance, Defining Liberal Values in Our Schools in the Age of COVID. And so, part of this discussion today, we've got Jody Shaw. And Jody, she considers herself, I love this, Jody, a reluctant activist. And you might know her because she's the one who blew the whistle on the discriminatory work environment that she encountered at Smith College. And her resignation letter was published by journalist Barry Weiss. And she began to advocate with other people who are facing the same thing. And she's now founded a group called Integrity Matters to support individuals in similar situations. We've also got Andrew Gutman. He is the co-founder of the Institute for Liberal Values that is hosting this event. And he also went viral when Barry Weiss published his letter on his school to the Brearley, or on his letter to the Brearley School. And he also, I don't know if you'd call yourself a reluctant activist, Andrew, but he is also an activist in this movement, writing about the issues and speaking up. And he founded the organization Speak Up for Education.
I'll say accidental activist.
Accidental activist. Okay, we got a reluctant and accidental. Jenny, you find your adjective here. So,
I'm not an activist at all.
Jenny is an Irish-American writer living in Belfast. She's a journalist. She's been published in the New York Times, the Providence Journal, and Condé Nast. She's a speechwriter and small business owner, and she also now writes. You can find her at Jenny E. Holland .substack.com. And I am your host, as usual, Jennifer Richmond. I am also co-founder, of the Institute of Liberal Values, founder of and host of the Hold My Drink podcast, and community coordinator for the Moral Courage Project. So a little introduction to this conversation before we get in. We have designed this not as a debate, but as a discussion. I will probably play some devil's advocate in there, but we come to this discussion in good faith. The reason that we decided to have this discussion is we didn't feel that people felt comfortable having it. So we're not here as scientists. We're not going to try to push any scientific information, but we're here to talk about, in the age of COVID, statism and compliance and how that has impacted liberal values. So with no further ado, I'm going to let Jody, is the one who really spearheaded this conversation, and I'm going to let her start us off. So Jody, the mic is to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Whoa. Okay. I apologize. I have some sound effects on. I'm going to turn them off. There. Can you hear me? Okay. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Institute for Liberal Values. Thank you, Andrew, Jenny, Jennifer, and for co-hosting this with Integrity Matters. Many people who know me online know me because of Smith, as Jennifer explained, and because I spoke out about the racially hostile environment that I encountered there as an employee. I'm happy to be discussing this topic because, as Jennifer said, I think a lot of people are uncomfortable discussing it. Specifically, in my mind, I see what I hope to accomplish or achieve or hope to get people to start talking across this bridge, the anti-woke sphere, if you will, and the people who are very much against COVID mandates, because I do see that these are both operating in a very similar fashion, and I don't see a lot of people who are able to make that bridge, or at least that has not been demonstrated to me. So sorry, I have notes here. So I'm going to start with Smith College. I'm going to say both of these things have very similar, if not identical, mechanisms of action. Both have carrots, both have sticks, both have a stated outcome and actual outcomes, which are actually in direct opposition to the stated outcomes. And so I'm going to go through those things and I'm going to talk about that stuff. But I'm going to start with Smith's. So it took me a really long time to figure out what was going on at Smith College. I did eventually get to a point where I knew that what they were doing was illegal. and that it was in violation of the Civil Rights Act. But it wasn't really until I got to the point where I was separating, or around that point, being separated from, I'll put it, Smith College, that I was able to fully explain to myself what was actually happening inside of me, and how this woke ideology, for lack of a better word, or critical social justice, had managed to capture me, and I was going along with it, and was then finally started figuring out how it was working, and was able to see outside of it. And so that's how I personally come to understand this stuff, is I figure out how it's working inside of me. So I guess it's more of a psychological viewpoint. I'm not a psychologist, but that's what interests me. And I see the process that I went through personally with the COVID narrative, I'm going to call it a narrative, was very, very similar, which to me indicates that we have the same thing going on here. And that's the bridge I'm going to try to make. So when I first started working at Smith, I was told that I must do X in order to achieve Y. And the X was, you must do something as an individual in order for the greater good, for this greater collective goal. And so this is the carrot. The carrot is, if you at Smith College as a white person, if you discuss your race in the way you are expected to as a white person, then you will help us achieve this greater good, which is otherwise known as social justice or equity or anti-racism. And that seemed pretty good to me. And that's the carrot. The carrot is, you can be a good person if you do X to achieve Y. We see the same carrot with COVID. The carrot with COVID is, if you do X to your body, or if you go along with these mandates, then we will achieve public health. Why? So when I first encountered this at Smith, I didn't question it. I thought, well, I want to be a good person. I don't like racism. That's bad. So here's this elite liberal arts institution explaining to me exactly the steps I can take to achieve racial justice or social justice and equity. So I'm going to do it. But I found very quickly that as I started walking the walk and talking the talk and doing the work, that something didn't feel right. So there's a little voice inside me saying, oh, this doesn't feel right. And what didn't feel right was these authentic conversations about race did not feel authentic. They felt very scripted, very stilted. And so I started to ask few more questions in my head. And I started thinking about the steps I was being asked to follow in order to achieve this greater good. And I started thinking more about the greater good, social justice. Like, what does that mean? And what does equity mean? And how are these things that I'm doing going to achieve that? And as soon as I started thinking about it a lot more, it started to all kind of fall apart. And I did eventually ask for definitions from the college, which they did not provide to me, which was another, it pushed me even further along in my journey. So as it started to all break down, that's when I met up with the stick. So the carrot was the greater good, and you can be a good person. And now I found myself right up against the stick, which is, if you don't go along with this, you are a bad person, and you are bad because you are upholding white supremacy, you are racist, and you are hurting people, you are offending people, and you're harming people, and you're allowing racism to continue and racial disparities to continue. So that's a pretty hard stick. Nobody likes to be called a racist. And there was another stick within this stick, which was, and you might lose your job. So I think anybody who's working in a very woke environment where this stuff is being pushed on you knows those sticks. And then there's another stick, and I call this the internal stick that I was beating myself with, which is when that little voice started telling me something's not right, I reflexively tried to squelch that voice. And I did that because I thought I was believing this stuff, and I thought that little voice meant I was racist and bad. And I didn't. So now I don't even need the external sticks. I'm doing it to myself. So this is the self-policing part. So I'm figuring all this stuff out, and I'm seeing how this is not logical. And not only is the stated outcome not being achieved, but actually the opposite of the outcome is being achieved, which is this anti-racism stuff is actually asking me to engage in racial prejudice ascribe assumptions and motivations and other characteristics onto people based upon their skin color. And it is also what I was witnessing was instead of making for a better community, it was dividing us. It was making people afraid of each other, afraid to joke around and just be jovial and be relaxed around each other. And this inauthenticity that accompanied it makes it very hard for an individual to connect with another individual in a fully realized way. When you're already cordoning off part of yourself, you can't connect with other people. So I saw it as very destructive both to individuals and to the community at Smith and at large. So COVID comes along, and I went through the same process with the COVID narrative. Although it was actually quicker because I could recognize that it had the same mechanism of action. I was able to figure it out sooner. So with COVID, we have the carrot, which is the public health. And we have, here are the steps that you, the individual, must take in order to achieve this greater good of public health. And I went along with it. I was scared. I put my mask on. I was the first person to wear a mask in Northampton, I think. Because I remember going to the supermarket and I found a mask and people were like, where'd you get the mask? Because you couldn't get masks, if you recall. I managed to get masks and I was going along with this. And then as things started to unfold, I started to hear that little voice inside me. And I immediately started to push that voice down thinking, because I had seen what had happened to other people. And I thought these things were completely separate. I thought people are politicizing the COVID stuff. It has nothing to do with woke. It's completely separate. And I saw what happened to other people when they questioned COVID measures and COVID mandates. They were called conspiracy theorists and flat earthers and also selfish. And literally, you are hurting people. If you're hurting the greater good, you're causing people to get sick if you don't do X. So now we're at the stick again. Sorry. So now I'm at the stick. I've left the carrot. I'm like, that carrot isn't looking so good. Like, I don't know what they mean by public health. How is that defined? How is it measured? And are these steps that I'm being asked to take achieving that? And so now I'm at the stick where I'm starting to question the vax mandates and COVID and masking and all that publicly. And what happened to me this summer and early in this fall is very similar to what happened when I spoke out at Smith College, which is people called me names. And I actually had in the COVID stuff, I had people asking if I was okay. I think they thought I was mentally debilitated. And so this is a very loud and clear signal to me that something is wrong. And so the mechanisms of action are the same. The carrots are the same. The sticks are the same. The stated outcome is unclear and vague. And it's very unclear as to whether these steps we're being asked to take can even achieve such a thing. So it's very hard to say what you can do to achieve something when you don't define what that thing is. So that's my process. And I think people, sorry, let me look at my notes. In both scenarios, we have a lot of dehumanization going on. With the woke stuff, people are reduced to political or racial objects. With the COVID stuff, we are being reduced to biological units. Okay, so I want to say here that I am not of the notion that there is never a time when an individual shouldn't be asked to, or never a time when they should be asked to give up some kind of individual liberty for the greater good. I understand there's a social contract. I drive on the right side of the road. I think Jenny drives on the left. I'm not sure. But, I don't walk around naked. I understand there's a social contract, and I understand the need for government. Every probably human society on the planet since the beginning of time has had some kind of government. That's just what we do as humans. But this is a much different beast. We have decided as a society that to ask an individual to give up us liberty for the greater good, we have decided as a society that the bar is very high to expect somebody to do that. And as I see it, we are nowhere near meeting that bar. And if we allow these mandates to continue, and we allow that through the self-policing, I think that's the most effective mechanism personally, but we have all the other sticks and carrots going on too, of course, too. If we allow this to happen, then we have now agreed that this bar is no longer up here. This bar is now down here. And once that bar goes down there, once we have all agreed that the bar is down this low, a whole lot of other stuff can happen. A whole lot of stuff we can't even imagine. So what does this mean for kids? This means extreme governmental overreach for your children. It means that the woke stuff is the hearts and the minds. The COVID stuff is their bodies. As many parents know, there comes a time in every child's life when their peers become more important or more influential on their thinking than you do as a parent. And so what that means and what this looks like in schools is if your child is surrounded by a bunch of other students and adults who are telling them all day long, every day, that the sky is purple, there is going to come a time when they come home and they tell you, the sky is purple, Mom, and you're going to say, no, the sky's blue. And they're going to say, no, it's purple. And not only that, but if you push it and try to insist that the sky is blue, then they're going to start to see you as the enemy. So at this time in a child's life, this is the time when they're coming into their own, they're becoming independent, mature adults. That's not happening. They are not leaving just you. They've actually been captured by this central authority that is telling them the sky is purple. In other words, ignore the reality of your own senses. Ignore what you see and hear and believe this instead. So that's the woke. That's the woke ideology. We're going to tell you what to think, what to feel, and what to speak. The COVID stuff is we are going to make sure that you know that not only do we own your mind and your heart, we also own your body. And we are going to tell you, we have the authority to tell you what to do with your body too. Well, I think it was hard enough for me to figure out what was going on at Smith College. And I, as a child, I had a pretty traditional education. There was no indoctrination going on. There wasn't this woke stuff. Our children are depending on us to protect them and make sure that they are intact, that they are able to take in information through their senses, analyze it, and make sense of it and ask questions and figure things out on their own. The woke ideology and the COVID ideology, if it smells and looks like an ideology, it probably is. If you're not allowed to question it, it probably is. If that captures our children, then we are pretty much assured that they are not going to have anywhere near the kind of future that we want for them, or that I would think that most of us want for them. And I'm talking about freedom. And when I talk about freedom, I'm talking about freedom inside their own head to think their own thoughts, because that's where freedom starts. If you don't have that in your own head, then you can't have any freedom outside. So I'm challenging people who are in the anti-woke sphere, who are looking at me and thinking, oh, I think she's gone off the deep end. I don't understand why people are against these mandates. It's for the public good. I'm challenging you to go outside that narrative and question it. And if you find that there's a little bit of fear doing that, you're afraid to question it, you're afraid to ask questions out loud, that's a signal that you should definitely do it. And I'm going to challenge the people, because I've actually met some people who are very much against COVID mandates who don't understand how the woke stuff works. I'm going to challenge you to check out the woke stuff and see how it operates in similar fashion, because the woke is the grooming. The COVID-19 measures are the knockout punch. That's what's going on here. It's the exact same thing. And it is very destructive. And it all goes towards the same thing, which is totalitarianism.
Jody, I've got a few questions for you, but I'm going to let Andrew and Jenny kind of get some ideas in there, and then we'll just pull this all into a big discussion.
I
So,
hope that wasn't
Andrew,
too long. I'm
oh
sorry.
no, that was this. Yeah, thank you. So, Andrew, there you go. Oh,
I got nothing
you
because
got
I think
nothing.
well, no, I have got a lot, but I don't want to repeat everything Jody said. I think what she said was terrific and kind of summarized everything perfectly. So
Well,
I can answer questions, but I want to go ahead. Go ahead. You can ask me what.
no. I was gonna say Jody just dropped off. I got her back on. But I mean, what are I know that you have been looking at this issue in New York,
Yeah.
and I would love to just hear what is your pushback against the man. Like, what is your personal pushback about the mandates and
Yeah. Well, I had somewhat similar, a little bit different experience with Jody. I'll say what's similar is that, so I'm known for one thing in this world, which is writing this letter to the parents of my daughter's former school. Really, that went viral about, what we now call critical race theory, or what, we then called anti-racism initiatives. And what a lot of people don't know, I think I may have talked about this here and there, but not very broadly, is that in my first version of the letter, I had a lot of stuff on COVID on there. About their COVID restrictions, because we actually started talking with the school at the beginning of the school year about how I thought abusive their COVID restrictions were before we started complaining about the anti-racism initiatives, and got nowhere on that, and got nowhere with parents. And I'll say two things. One, the very similar experience I had with Jody, which is that I was talking a lot online. I mean, not that I was that active on social media, but I was writing a lot of comments in New York Times articles at the beginning of COVID with a different view than almost everybody else had. And then sort of stopped when my letter went viral, started really talking about just the critical race theory stuff. And then occasionally when I would mention COVID, I got the same experience, not exactly the same, but similar to Jody, which is just stick to COVID. I mean, just stick to CRT, right? You're crazy. Stop talking about the COVID stuff. What I did find, having connected with people all across the country, is there is more of a connection between the COVID and the CRT, I think, outside of blue places like New York City, places like New England, where Jody and I are from, than there is here. I think I'm so disappointed in my fellow New Yorkers. So many of them do understand that what is going on in the schools in terms of the critical race theory is batshit crazy. They were terrified to speak up, which is why we're making, little progress, especially in the private school world, especially in New York City. But they do recognize that it's nuts and that it is damaging to society and damaging to education and damaging to kids. But so few of them are even willing to think about the COVID restrictions, think about whether they make sense, think about whether the cure is worse than the disease and all these things. They just refuse. They've just been completely brainwashed on these issues. So again, in places like New York City, it's been really frustrating to try to get that message across. So that experience, I think, is very similar. But I'm in full agreement that there's a lot of overlap between the issues. I think that the critical race theory in schools has been in process for many years, and the social justice and the social emotional learning. And I think a lot of parents didn't realize that until the events of George Floyd and BLM, when the light switch went off, and the school's missions changed. This has been in process for a long time. But what I think, and I'm curious to get other people's views on this, it never happens as quickly absent COVID. Because once the schools shut down, everything went remote, parents weren't allowed in the school, parents weren't talking to each other, no one was getting together. I think absent COVID, there would have been a lot more pushback on the woke stuff. And they used that opportunity of not having parents involved and not having parents talk to each other, not having parents being able to come in and talk to the head of school, to push a lot of this through much, much more quickly. So, I'm curious to, if other people kind of agree with that. But I'll end with this, which is the same thing Jody ended with. This is absolutely terrifying on both the woke stuff and the COVID stuff. This is absolutely leading towards totalitarianism. And I don't know how we stop this. Maybe we talk about that. But we've got to try, and we've got to fight on both these related issues.
All right, and Jenny, you are coming from it I know you're Irish American. You are living in outside of Belfast now, so you're seeing it also from a little bit of a different perspective. So I'm very interested to see what that comparison is, and also just your feedback. Same questions to you: is what's the tie between this kind of woke and the COVID and the totalitarianism?
Yeah. Well, my perspective is different not only because I live outside the US now, but I haven't been at the coalface in the way that Andrew and Jody have. I haven't had to put my kids' education or my livelihood on the line. But I did start noticing this a very long time ago, over a decade ago, actually. Um, and first, it was when my mother was a teacher in the New York City public school system. And I first got a sort of peek into how badly served New York City's working class kids were by their school system. And then a little later on, I started to see amongst my own cohort um, things that I found very unsettling. For example, a friend of mine told me that her 5-year-old son came home from kindergarten crying because he had been told by his teacher that a bad white man killed Martin Luther King. And I remember at the time thinking, like, why on earth do you need to tell a kid in kindergarten this? Um, Around the same time, I just happened upon a documentary. I was actually at home on maternity leave. And I happened upon a documentary. I was on like Showtime or something, set in the town where my mother grew up, outside of New York City. And this beautiful little class of first graders or kindergartners and their beautiful young teacher. And it was very sweet. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this racial line came in where the teacher is telling the little kids that basically, I mean, I'm not quoting verbatim, but like white people treat black people badly. And you could literally I literally watched these little faces all of a sudden look around at each other like the serpent was in the garden, like the innocence was lost. These little kids started looking at each other like frightened and anxious and unhappy. And I was just flicking through and I was just like, this is a terrible thing. I'm very, very deeply uncomfortable about with this. And so I saw that direction and I didn't like it. The funny thing is, though, that at the time I would have considered myself, and I actually openly called myself a statist. This is why I'm very interested in the way the title of this live stream, the topic, because I literally describe myself as a statist. And that's because I had, from my own life experience, I attributed a lot of my material well-being to the fact that I had grown up in sort of well-ordered democratic states. I mean, small d democratic states run by democracies. And I had come from a family that, my own grandmother, so not exactly a distant ancestor, my grandmother was so poor that as a child, she couldn't go to school half the time because she didn't have shoes. Her shoes were in the pawn shop. Her baby brother died and the mother couldn't afford a tombstone. So the child was thrown into a communal pit. So the fact that in such a short space of time, there had been this like pole vaulting of social mobility, I attributed that to the state. And I think there's something that was a fair and reasoned stance at the time. So the fact that in the last 5 years, I've completely changed my opinion on this matter. And if anything, now I see the state as a hindrance, if not a threat, it's crazy to me. It's crazy. Now, maybe it's not me that's changed. Maybe it's the state that has changed. And I think also that one way I have of trying to process what's happening is by viewing it almost as we're in a certain stage of a sort of inherent life cycle of the state and of society, and that the portion of the life cycle we are in is a sort of over ripening. And if you think about it, you think about like how many generations have there been now of this sort of school to college to professional workplace pipeline that's just filling up and filling up and filling up and flooding the jobs market and flooding society with these extremely well-educated, um, professionals. You know, and we're at the point now where it's totally clogging up society. And what are these people supposed to do with these fancy degrees, right? So we have the society that's very top heavy with professionals, like the professional managerial class, let's call it that. And they have to have a lot of baggage with them. But these professionals, whilst they completely dominate in all institutions and and they have their hands on all levers of power, it seems, they are completely and utterly unmoored from the majority of Americans who do not share their values, they do not share their culture, they do not share their aspirations. So we have this painful split. And the fact of the matter is that the professional managerial class is simply too powerful. And now it's created an emergency situation where we have these crazy things like, and as Jody said, and as Andrew said, CRT basically softened up the ground for the COVID restrictions. And this over ripening that's happened in the life cycle of this state, which I think is probably just an inevitability, is really turning into something that is profoundly dangerous, and that is this creeping or galloping even totalitarianism. But there's a quick thing about the liberal part of the title of this stream, and it's the interesting role I think that liberal values has in this whole mess, because those very values that I would have said 10, 20 years ago created a society where I could have a, safe and fun and free life, to, unlike many generations of women that came before me. Those values are also kind of responsible for this situation that we're in. This emphasis on sort of elite education, this love of institutions, this huge faith and prestige given to institutions, no skepticism of institutions, the bourgeois professional aspirations, and most of all, this kind of wishy-washy tolerance and kindness and niceness. They've kind of created this milieu where, it's like that meme, weak men create bad times create strong men create good times create weak men. That's the life cycle that we're in. And so all of these liberal values that were literally put in place to prevent against the very things that we're seeing happen are in fact at the root of what is happening. This idea that we have to tolerate and accept things, which is very true, we do. But those things have been hijacked and weaponized and turned against us, so that now we, without noticing it, we've slipped over from the liberal values, which is, treat others as you would be treated yourself, and respect and reciprocity. We've switched over to that, from that to this sort of communitarian, well, let's just call it communist idea, where somehow my inherent being is somehow responsible for some stranger's inherent being, whether it's through my skin tone or through my vaccination status. And if I do not comply, then I am at best shunned from polite society, and from all functions of society, including work in some places. So, it's like, how do we get around that problem? How do we get around the problem that the very thing that was supposed to cure totalitarianism, i.e. liberalism, somehow has recreated a new version of totalitarianism? I don't know if I have the answer to that question. That's a deep philosophical question.
Well, I'll bring us all up on stage so we can actually start to talk around those issues. I've got a few questions. It doesn't matter who answers them, but I'm really confused about this issue. So let me tell you a few things that people hit me with. Ideas of, Jody, you touched on this: social contract, public health, public safety, etc. And I believe I'm a big, strong proponent of individuality. I believe individualism is different than individuality. I don't I think that there is a both and instead of an either or. I mean, I think we're individuals that have to live in society. So let's talk about the public health. I mean, if there is a public health crisis, at what point do we have responsibility to other people? So for example, I've been doing a little bit of work asking people their other ideas. So some people say, well, what about the polio vaccine? Some people have said, well, what about seatbelts, right? So how do we square what's happening with COVID with, say, those two things, the polio vaccine or seatbelts? Where is that different?
Well, sorry, Andrew.
Go ahead. No, you go first.
I was just going to say, we're entering into the science zone.
We gotta be careful.
No, that's a good question. I think about it a lot. I think that the answer lies in the infection mortality rate. I don't know. It doesn't seem like this is a very, dare I say, dangerous virus to most people, and especially to children. Since we're talking about children, the flu is actually much more of a risk, and in terms of severe illness, and we don't mandate flu vaccines and have creating vax passes for it and all that and so on and so forth.
Not yet.
Not right. Which begs the question, have you seen this meme? Like, do we have COVID? Do we have the vax pass because of COVID, or do we have COVID because we need the vax pass? And that's, I think, while the COVID stuff is a real threat, I'm thinking beyond this, that there's not a lot of, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think I don't know a lot about the polio vaccine. I know that polio is, I don't think it was actually mandated until several years after it came out. I don't want to get too much into the science, but I think if we just compare COVID to flu, we already have our answer. And I think there's something about that individual responsibility part that Jenny was talking about, where you become we're taking away the responsibility of the individual for themselves, and we're now making the individual responsible for everyone else. And that is also extremely disempowering. That also makes it so that, you don't have to take care of yourself either. Like, we have and defining public health, defining the outcome. What do we mean by public health? We have diabetes, we have obesity. We don't have people saying you have to go to the gym because you are 50 pounds overweight. So, and we're going to give you this little pass. You're going to put it in your hand, which they're doing in Sweden now. You're going to put it in your hand. And we're going to check you to make sure you went to the gym 5 times this week and that you stayed on that treadmill for 30 minutes each time. We don't do that. And yet that is considered, last time I checked, a public health crisis. Obesity, that has killed so many people or been a comorbidity or been a factor. So if we just start thinking logically, like comparing it to other things, it doesn't add up. And so that's when I start thinking, well, why are we doing this then?
So I'll add, you want to follow up?
No, I just wanted to confirm what I heard to make sure that as you know it, and again, we're not scientists and we're not pulling up numbers here, but as you know it, for our and that's, we're talking about school age kids, for our younger population, the flu is as dangerous or more so than COVID for our young children. Is that?
That's unequivocal. That is
okay.
Correct.
That's okay.
And that is true not just for kids. That is true up to a certain age. I don't know. I'm again, that might be true up to 40. Healthy. Okay. But so I think there's 3 parts of the answer, and that's one of it. It's number one, is this a crisis? Again, what Jody said in her introduction is correct. Unless you're a complete anarchist, you recognize that there are times when public health might trump the individual freedom, or for that matter, anything community-wise might trump the individual freedom, right? Almost anybody's going to agree with that. So the question number one is this that kind of scenario? Is this a crisis? And I think it is clear that COVID does not meet that threshold, not even close. Certainly not for kids. I mean, for kids, like Jody said, absolutely. But for society, it doesn't. Now, we have known that since at least March of 2020. We have known, real scientists, not the people that show up on TV every Sunday morning, or every day, know that, give or take what the IF or what the infection fatality rate really is. And it is not that much more than, a bad flu season. So question number one, is this really a crisis? Again, I don't think COVID meets that threshold. Number two is, do the interventions actually even work? So take vaccine mandates, right? The rationale for a vaccine mandate, right, different from the rationale for taking a vaccine. The rationale for a vaccine mandate is that it stops transmission, right? We know now with certainty that the vaccines do not stop transmission. So therefore, there is no rationale for vaccine mandates. If you want to take a vaccine because you think, and for some demographics, this may be true, that it stops you from serious illness or death for a period of time, because we know now that they wear off, that is valid. But there is no validity in the vaccine mandate if they do not stop transmission. And we know they do not stop transmission. Okay. And then the third thing, even if the intervention, and by the way, that's even more so for masks, which we know, if you actually bother to look at data, that they are at best utterly useless and actually have significant harms, especially to children. Okay. But the third thing is, even if the interventions do work, right, are the costs, what is the cost benefit? Is the benefit of those interventions more than the costs? And we could, again, I don't want to get too deep into the vaccine issue, but there's strong arguments. First of all, we know natural immunity is significantly better, orders of magnitude better than immunity from the mandate. So there's a strong argument to say, even if the vaccine did prevent transmission for a while, that natural immunity is going to be better. We're better off getting healthy people, not get very sick, and as quickly as possible, which is what happened in New York City, because we had herd immunity, even nobody believes me, by about March of 2020. You're better off having healthy people, which is almost everybody, catch COVID, get herd immunity, protect the at risk for a little while as best you can, and then you're done, right? Which is a lot better than taking vaccines forever. So again, is this a crisis? No, right? Do the interventions actually work? In this case, no. And even if they do work, are the benefits greater than the costs? And for all of these interventions, including lockdowns, we are literally destroying the world over something that is not that much worse than a bad flu season. And that's what it is. Okay, it's a nasty virus that has killed a lot of people. There's no question, but it is not killing young people. It is not really killing healthy people. Okay, this is not worth destroying the world over. So those are the three things you have to look at to say, is it worth, is the public health, does that trump, the individual freedom issue?
One thing I've noticed about, because I've been asked the similar question, Jennifer, is like the seatbelt issue and the childhood vaccination issue. And my son and I both, I think, I don't remember being vaccinated myself, but I remember having my son have all the standard childhood vaccinations, didn't think twice about it. And to me, it's just like the constant bringing up of these two comparisons, I find trite, let's say, because they're not apples to apples comparisons. Like when people mention seatbelts to me, it's like, no, I don't have a problem with wearing a seatbelt, but also I'm not being asked to wear it across my mouth and nose, where I'm not being asked to impede my own ability to breathe. I'm not being asked to wear a seatbelt so that it collects all the bacteria that I have in my nose and mouth and let it sit on my face and proliferate for the entire day. Like, that's not how seatbelts work. So of course I don't have a problem with seatbelts, because they don't do me any material harm when I strap one across my torso and I click it into the car. And the vaccination issue is like, well, I'm sorry, but it's not the same condition. It's not the same disease. It's not the same vaccine. It's not the same technology. It's not the same situation. It's just not the same. The frustrating thing is that, I do occasionally force myself to watch mainstream media and read and watch their narratives unfold. And it's literally like watching a mirror image of everything we're saying. They're saying just slightly, like just mirror image back to me. So they would, for example, if they were watching this, they would probably be thinking what I'm thinking. It's like, this is just, they have everything backwards. They have everything back to front. And it's a very psychically painful condition that we're all living in, where there's one group of us, like say, who are see this set of facts and these set of circumstances for what it is. I'm quite sure that we're the ones who are correct. But on the other side, it's like they have their own set of facts and they have their own studies and they have their own science. And it's this never ending, these two things that the bridge can, or the gap cannot be bridged. I don't know how to counteract that, because the few times I've had people come back to me and with these issues of, like, say the vaccinations, when I tell them what I think the issue is, that's just the end of the conversation. Like, they don't get back. It's sort of, you just have to agree to disagree, sort of part ways, and maybe never speak again. As we'll see. I don't know. And it's just, I don't know where that goes. But I think maybe part of it is with where COVID has an edge on CRT in terms of being a mind virus, is that I think there's a lot of people who are very invested in this idea that they're rational and understand data and understand science. I am not one of those people, by the way. I don't pretend to have any understanding of data or science. So I'm not emotionally attached to the thought that maybe I have a great understanding of this. I just feel like I have common sense, right? But I think it's very painful for those people. It's just a bridge too far to say to those people, yeah, you saw the Looney Tunes of CRT and you saw that, and that was like, okay, that's clearly like nuts. So I can stand up against that. But then if you're taking on science, and science has become this godlike concept, oh no, absolutely not. I'm holding dear to that. And then you're done. You're never going to get through to that person with any argument, because there's such a huge emotional investment in this idea that COVID presents this, like, it's like the Black Death 3.0.
I think that's part of it. I think that's what makes it more intense and harder for people to make the bridge. I think it's it's the fear, because it's not just fear of being called a name. It's like, or like the woke stuff where we're afraid of each other. We're dancing, we're mincing our words, we're following a script. It's the literal fear that one person is going to infect you. This isn't just guilt by association. Like, I can't hang out with that person because they said the wrong thing. It's, I can't hang out with this person because they are going to infect me with a virus that is going to make me sick and possibly kill me. And it's gotten so off the rails that we now associate unvaccinated with infected. Unvaccinated equals infected. And vaccinated equals perfectly fine.
And they did that with masks too. Unmasked was the same thing, right? At the beginning. And then and one of the things that these have in common is the divisiveness.
Yes.
CRT, the wokeness, and the COVID. They're trying to divide us
physically divide and cover.
And it's worked
faces.
really well. It has succeeded.
And
whoever they are, they won. They won.
Well, let's not give up yet. We are losing, but we are still fighting. I want to add, on the issue of when is it appropriate to take away personal freedom for something like public health, I want to add one more thing, which is that one thing is very clear from a classical liberal standpoint: the burden of proof has to be on the government that is doing that to prove without a shadow of the doubt efficacy here, and they have so clearly not done that. Right? It's not the burden of proof on let's say the non-masked or the non-vaccinated to show that these don't work. It is the burden of the proof of the public health authorities to show that they do. Now, they claim that they have shown that, but from a scientific standpoint, that is absolutely not the case. It's laughable what they've shown.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? I mean, so looking at it just as a from the outside in, we did see a staggering amount. I mean, in a short period of time of deaths, staggering. I know I'm okay. It wasn't, the plague or anything, but, more so than you would see in an average flu season.
Yes.
When they did shut down the cities, which for me personally, I'll just say that I had a problem with that myself, but they will show that they, in some ways, halted the contagion. So that's the information that we're getting through the media. So where are you not buying that story?
Well, that's not what the real data shows. Because if you look at like New York City, for example, if you could infer, you can't look at case data because it was, if you remember, it was so hard to get tested, right? We can't look at what accurate cases, but you can infer cases from hospitalizations and deaths. And there's a lag between hospitalizations and deaths, so you can go back and infer cases. If you look at data like that, for example, in New York City, which I've done a while ago, you can see that it was already a significant decline before there were any interventions, before there were lockdowns, before there were masks. Okay, the virus was already burning itself out like all respiratory viruses do. Respiratory viruses tend to be, call it 6 to 12 week events. They have a big up, they reach what is properly called herd immunity, which means they burn themselves out in the community for a number of reasons. They go down, and it sort of looks like this. It's something that goes by, it's like a Gompertz curve, Gompertz, I think, named after somebody. And so we've seen that. Now, the obvious thing to always look at is Sweden, which had the fewest restrictions, of anywhere. Not absolutely zero restrictions, but almost zero, where they didn't have lockdowns, they didn't have masks. And you don't really, they are below average for deaths, in Europe. You have not, if you age adjust, they do not have age adjusted excess deaths for that flu season, actually. And so this is a place that had, everyone thought this was crazy what Sweden did or what Sweden didn't do. And it shows the interventions weren't necessary. In fact, they had lower than most countries in Europe. Now, people say they had higher than their Scandinavian neighbors, which is true. And there are a number of reasons for that. They had a very, very weak flu season the year prior. So there's something called the dry tinder effect, which is you keep people alive a year more than they, in a typical flu season, they would have been alive. And then you have more deaths the next year. They also have a lot of lower income immigrants that the other Scandinavians don't have, which makes, and they're less healthy and they live in together in bigger families with multi-generation. So there are reasons for that. But, looking at, this is what you don't get from the mainstream media. You're not getting these stories, and you have to work really, really hard to actually understand what's going on. You have to know who to follow on Twitter and what, esoteric Substacks and podcasts to really, to watch and read, to really learn what's going on. But if you're capable, if you're interested, and I wish everybody was and capable of doing that, which not everybody is, but again, this is why I'm disappointed in my New Yorkers, because most of them are smart enough to do this and should be curious enough to do this. You can get the real data. You can get the real information. What you see is the people that are writing this stuff are so much smarter than the public health officials that we see on TV. There is no question about that.
That's one of the most extraordinary things that I've noticed is just how debased both the media and the government officials, the public facing ones, have been. I just in terms, mediocrity is a kind word to describe just the utter. They just seem so unprofessional half the time. Do you remember, I think it was the beginning of this year, is it Rochelle Walensky?
Head of the CDC now.
Made this insane video where it was like this strange background where she had like a color filter. It really did look very like North Korea propaganda channel. And she's sitting there and she starts crying and saying, she said she used the phrase impending doom. She says, I have a sense of impending doom, and she's crying. And I was like, I cannot believe this is the best that the United States government can do. This creature, this absolutely unprofessional, shockingly embarrassing outburst. This is passing somehow as leadership and the science and the professionals. Meanwhile, people like me, who I make no claims to understand much of anything, but it's like, oh, how do you, what state your facts, state your research, and so there's the simultaneously this idea that like the normal person, man on the street, is too dumb to have an opinion, and we should bow down before the gods of government. Meanwhile, the government and the people who are supposed to be covering them, but actually they're just kissing their ass, are like, dumb is too kind a word. I can't believe it. Like, what happened to our elites? How did they get so bad at their jobs?
Can I address that? Okay, that's a great question. Okay, so I have the answers to that. First of all, some
Good.
clever folks on the internet have said, people who get their masters in public health are the people who failed out of Orgo and couldn't become doctors because they all really wanted to become doctors. And these are the people that we're listening to. That's number one. Number two, good scientists don't go on TV because they're in the lab, right? The best scientists are actually doing science. They are not going on TV all the time, okay? And folks like, Saint Fauci, he's not, he might have been a scientist 40 or 50 or 150 years ago, however old he is, but he's a bureaucrat, right? He's the highest paid, I think, federal government official. He is a politician. He is a bureaucrat. He runs an enormous organization. He loves going on TV. This is not a scientist, right? And he said the other day, I am the science, which is the scariest thing anyone could say.
It's really scary.
To your question, and this will be somewhat of a controversial answer. Very few really smart people go into science and medicine anymore. Okay. They go into finance and then they go into tech. And so what you find is that the really smart people on the internet who actually do a lot of this data crunching and writing and analysis, they're like hedge fund guys or they're tech guys. Why? Because they are much smarter than the people that go into science and medicine. Now, that wasn't true a couple of generations ago, and this is a bigger piece. One of the reasons we're in all the trouble we're in is because there's too much money out there, created all this income inequality. But one of the other effects of that is it sucked up, not all, but almost all of the first-rate minds that used to go into science and medicine and academia and journalism into finance and then tech. So what you have in science and medicine and journalism and academia are very few first-rate minds.
Right. That's very interesting.
Most people don't recognize that because, listen, you can only judge, this is my own theory, you can only judge intelligence up into your own. Okay. Beyond that, everybody looks really smart. So for the average person, any of these people, Fauci, whoever, Walensky, Donald Trump, seems smart, right? But to smarter people, you recognize these people are dumber than shit, right? Or at the very least, they're very unwise. Okay. Or they have ulterior motives, which is true too, right? The incentive structure is really bad. That's a whole nother issue. But again, that's one of the reasons that we're in this problem. You have the scientists, public health officials, the journalists who should be questioning and calling out these people, which are not doing that.
Yeah.
I think it's less. That was very good. Thank you, Andrew. I like that. I think there is some level of nefariousness here. Is that the right word? It's not just pure like dumb, ignorant, don't know what they're doing. And I'm thinking of a headline that Jenny, you said this was your like
I'm
aha
obsessed.
moment. It was the New York Times headline, and this also speaks to your we were talking about data and hospitalization rates. And I'll get to the headline, but my understanding of the hospitalization rates is that and this was brought up on Megyn Kelly's show, is that every single person who goes in the hospital is tested for COVID. And so if they're positive, even if they went to the hospital because they have their kidney hurts or they get their cancer, they're going to be marked as hospitalized with COVID. They go into the statistics. And I heard on the Megyn Kelly show that the hospitals were actually getting, as part of the CARES Act, I think, I don't know, we're getting like $50,000 per person or something if they had a COVID patient. And so they were considered a COVID patient, even if they were in the hospital for some other reason. So which brings us to the headline. Jenny, do you want to present the New York Times headline that changed your life?
I think it was it this time last year or the beginning of the year? And the headline was something grim milestone, 300,000 people with COVID have died. And I read that headline. It was big. It was a big fat headline. And I was like, what? And it wasn't the number. It was the word with. Because when
you're still using,
when you're talking about AIDS and the AIDS crisis and this, that, you don't say, you say AIDS has killed 1 million people or whatever it is. They died from AIDS. They died of AIDS. AIDS killed those people. Cancer kills X number of people a year. Car crashes kill X number of people a year. You don't die with something. So when I saw that headline, like that's not how
You die with your toenails.
Yes, exactly. That's not how newspaper. That's not how newspaper headlines are written. They're supposed to be written in the most clear and concise and direct language. And to say that 300,000 people with COVID have died means absolutely nothing. What killed them? Because as I said to Jody, like, I'm pretty sure 300,000 people also had eyeballs when they died. So 300,000 people with eyeballs have died. What exactly are you trying to say? And the tortured construction of that sentence, the unnatural to the human ear construction of that sentence, to me was the biggest tell I have come across in the media. And I worked for the New York Times for 3 very happy years, and I know for a fact that that headline would not have passed muster when I worked there because it wasn't ideologically captured.
Everything.
Or maybe it was, and I was innocent. I don't know.
No. The New York Times, which I have read, and I don't know why I still read it for 25 years. I barely read it, but it is a completely different newspaper than it was.
It is, and I worked there, so I know what it used to be like. And it's
every article.
Yeah,
is
except for the one about Smith College.
That's true. Actually, no.
Michael Powell.
That's
Michael Powell.
Michael Powell is one of the very, very few.
I can't believe he's still there.
Hand that is
He's
good.
still there. Yeah.
So I've got
Go ahead. You got to cut off.
Well, I was just gonna say I've got I still have a lot of questions, but here's where I have a lot of questions to you guys that we'll take up at another time. But here's where I'm kind of lean towards where you're at, or here's where, like, Jody, to use what you said, where something didn't feel right to me is, there's a lot of inconsistencies. We've got the mandate with, particularly, this is what I've seen very public, is, government employees having to be vaccinated or to lose their job, but that is not applied to people coming and immigrating to the United States. And so that's, to me, and that's not a discussion on immigration at all, but it's just not, it's not a balanced.
No, it's another tell. It's another one of the tells that indicates that what they're telling you is not what's actually happening. It just puts lie to the whole idea that this is actually a public health crisis.
This was obvious in BLM.
Yes.
Right? When you stay home, don't leave your house, we're in lockdown. All of a sudden you had BLM. So this is the connection between the woke and the COVID, right? All of a sudden you had BLM riots. No, you should be doing that. That's more important than public health. Before that, it was don't leave your house. And then, no, you should be out on the streets, not social distancing, protesting.
Right. I think it's those inconsistencies that I have questions with. So I still have questions for you guys on your stance. I'll let that, see if we've got any questions here. If anyone's got any questions, put them in the chat, and I'll let you guys, though, wrap up a little bit.
Well, I just want to state that I'm, like, as the word Andrew uses, disappointed. I am disappointed in this new, when I spoke out about Smith College, I lost a lot of friends, and people I thought were allies on this issue kind of disappeared because, the guilt by association thing, and I'd become kind of public, and they didn't want to be associated with me because they were afraid. And I was welcomed by open arms by many people, many other disaffected liberals, if you will, into this, I guess, for lack of the anti-woke sphere, I keep using that word, sorry, that's the best word I can think of. And so I was incredibly shocked, actually, when I did finally start speaking out about the vax mandates. And then the reason I started, some people were like, oh, you're going to dilute the issue, This affects me personally. This is the issue. And I'm just so very disappointed because I thought that this community I'd found, many people had the wherewithal and the ability to take in information and look at it critically and analyze it, and had the same general distrust of institutions. And that includes the pharmaceutical industry too, who has paid out billions of dollars in fines over the past few decades. those skills would carry over into this realm, and clearly that has not happened. And the only reason I can think is because it's a biological thing or a science thing, like Jenny said. But I have also heard this, that there are many people who actually agree that the vax mandates are wrong, but they don't want to dilute the CRT fight. So I'm just going to say this. If, and that's a big if we manage to push over the CRT stuff, and there's a lot of people talking about CRT now, and that's another thing too. There aren't a lot of lawsuits. There's a lot of lawsuits against the vax mandates. But so anyway, if we manage to push over the CRT stuff, if we manage to push it back, that is meaningless if we do not push back the vax mandates. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to add, just because that's a good place to jump off. The idea of the vax mandates becoming a thing that we live with in perpetuity, it just cannot be, because what a precedent to set. I almost don't take it seriously because it's too overwhelming. It's like, oh, it couldn't possibly really. Something will happen to stop it. Something will come along and people will stop it. People will rise up. Because if we allow the state to say to us all, regardless of our age, health status, or philosophy, or personal objection, you will take this into your body when we tell you to, or you will not live in this world. If we allow that, I don't care what the disease is. I don't care what the vaccine is. I do not care. If we allow that stance, there's nothing else to fight for. There's literally nothing else to fight for. So CRT, as you say, Jody, will not matter if we allow a state, an administrative state, because let's not kid ourselves that, I mean, no one elected Fauci and no one's going to vote him out of office. He is wholly unaccountable, democratically speaking. And if he is the one who is telling America, and then that domino effects for the rest of the world, that you will take it and you will shut the hell up, you will take it into your bloodstream, you will take it into your body, what happens after that? Where do you go from there?
Yeah.
Andrew?
The bar's down here now. Anything goes.
Yeah. No, look, there's a slippery slope aspect of this. I mean, I would agree that with both of you that COVID restriction, and I'll broaden it not just to vaccine mandates, but COVID restrictions generally, destroys the world and destroys human society well before the woke stuff will. The woke stuff will, but COVID will destroy us first. I mean, it's going to happen, and it, destroy, liberalism or freedom or whatever you want to call it. And we've got to find ways to push back. I mean, you're seeing protests in Europe. They get no attention from the mainstream media at all, but they're happening, but they're not seemingly having a big effect. We saw, Austria and Germany in the last couple of days come out with restrictions. We talked about that earlier. We've got to push back. I do sense there's a little bit of pushback against child masking, even in places like New York City. We're seeing that a little bit. People that never talked about COVID before finally saying this is ridiculous. You've got adults going to, sports stadiums and bars and restaurants, and you're masking these kids for 7-8 hours a day. And it's absolutely abusive. So we're seeing it a little bit, but we have got to find ways to push back on this and fight this. And I agree with Jody and Jenny. I mean, this is a disaster for human society.
Make the bridge, people. We have to connect these bubbles together.
And you've got to speak up.
Areas.
You've got to speak up. It's not just we've got to find ways to start getting more people to speak up and rally.
Can I just add one little thing? And you guys would probably have way more experience in this than I have, because, like I said, I'm not the one. I haven't been as impacted as you guys have. But like, one thing I think of in my own sphere is just decide, like, I don't care if somebody calls me an anti-vaxxer I don't care. It's just, I think that's holding so many people back, is the fear of being called names. And I don't mean to downplay that. Actually, I think that's a legitimate fear. It's a horrible feeling. It's terrible to look on the internet and see that someone's left a trail of of like insults about you and casting aspersions on you in all sorts of ways. It's horrible. It's not fun. But the only way to stop it is to just say, I don't care what you think of me. I don't care.
Well, with that, I think that we need to plan this again in like the new year to see what has transpired, because this is moving.
We'll all be locked up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe then we'll do this. At least we have.
Maybe they'll send us to the same camp.
Yes.
That would be nice.
They would never do that. They would make sure we went to separate camps. Maybe we could ask other people to join us too.
Yeah. Yep. I'd love that.
Thank you, Jennifer.
All right,
Yes.
y'all.
Yeah. Thank you to all of you and your organizations and all the work you guys do. I've been watching it from afar for a long time, and I have a lot of admiration for it. So thank you.
Thank you.